This is What to Believe, finding signal in the noise. I'm Neil Peerbaum, a journalist turned master coach reporting what I found across 4 decades of investigation into the human condition. What I found is a flaw in the human operating system, one that makes it hard for us to face the truth about ourselves and leaves us believing things about ourselves and the world that are false. You'll find a strange comfort here, the comfort of knowing how little is really true, how little of it really matters, and what to do with the reality that remains. Welcome back to another episode in this series where I'm exposing the flaw in the human operating system, one mechanism at a time, from different angles and using multiple examples. And remember, what we're doing here is learning to look at things directly so that you can gain an insight that causes a direct and immediate shift in behavior. You don't have to process your feelings about it. You see something and the behavior changes. And the thinking and feeling can catch up afterwards. And that gives you the power to self-manage in a way that doesn't cost you. And where giving up something is not experienced as a loss. The gain is self-mastery. The gain is the freedom that you get out of it. In the first 2 episodes, we looked at the automatic need to be right and the automatic need to look good in the eyes of others. Automatic being the key word in both. In episode 1, the pilot episode, we saw that we don't defend our ideas because they're true. We defend them because they're ours. What we're really defending is our identity, what those arguments say about us, about you. In episode 2, we saw that we're constantly trying to look good in the eyes of others by making an impression and saving face. And what you're really doing is giving your power away to a movie that you project onto the world. A movie that you think is real, but that nobody's really buying. And we saw how destructive these forces can be when they're in control of us, which they are, as long as we're not aware of them. In this episode, we're going to take a small step back, lift the hood a little, and look at what we're doing here. And in doing that, I'll show you a bit about the unique approach that we're taking, why that differs from learning or therapy, and what makes this approach so effective. I hope you're seeing that. There's that word again, seeing. I hope you're seeing that what we're doing here is direct, immediate, and powerful. If you haven't, it could be that you haven't engaged it beyond an intellectual level yet. That's fine. Or you don't believe it's possible. You know, when you sit with a problem for years and discover that it can be resolved in one session, sometimes it's hard to accept that. So we tend to hold on to the idea that things take time. Or it could be that you need more of the foundational stuff like I'm going to be giving you today. And of course, I might just not be doing a very good job. That's also possible. There are some key words that I've been using throughout, and those are automatic, mechanistic, the word automatic, the word mechanistic, the word phenomenon, and the word seeing. If you play this intro back, you'll see that I use the word saw, the past tense of see, a number of times where I might have used another word like learned. So I use phrases like you saw how, not you learned how. And these words are crucial and important because they underpin what we're doing here. So today we're going to look at them in detail. And let's start with automatic. An automatic reaction is one that starts up by itself and runs itself. The need to be right or look good doesn't wait for us to turn it on. It self-activates. It's automatic. To that extent, we don't have control over these reactions. And this is an important detail. We can gain a measure of control over them with awareness. So I might become aware of the automatic need to be right. I might see that I'm in that bad neighborhood and I take the first exit. I get the hell out. I don't stop to explain. But here's the crucial distinction. We can't control their existence as a phenomenon. We don't have a choice over the fact that they happen, just as we don't have a choice over the fact of breathing. With awareness, we can consciously manage our breath, but that's the limit of our power with regards to breathing. We can't stop breathing itself. In the same way, with awareness, we can consciously manage our need to be right or look good, but that's the limit of our power with regards to those things. We can't make them go away. They're automatic. Anyone who believes they've gotten rid of them entirely is fooling themselves. That's what we'd call a spiritual ego, or a lack of awareness. You can only manage these things. They're automatic. And when I say automatic, specifically, I mean they start up by themselves. We don't decide at 6 o'clock in the morning that at 8 o'clock today I'm going to start needing to be right or start needing to look good. We just find ourselves doing them. So they automate, they start by themselves. With awareness, we can manage them to a degree for a while. But ultimately, they're self-initiating and they have their own momentum. And very often, they overwhelm us. And that brings us to the second term, mechanistic. So you've heard me refer to each of these, the need to be right and the need to look good, as an automatic mechanistic ego reaction. Those exact words. The word mechanistic is key here. So these reactions, and there's more to come, by the way, we've only looked at 2 so far, form part of the structure of ego. And we often try to address them as personality features. We go to therapy and we ask, why am I so argumentative? Why do I care so much what people think of me? Why am I this way? What happened to me? What did my father or my mother do to me? From a structural, mechanistic point of view, we're wasting our time with that inquiry. It's like staring at a car that won't start and then Googling Toyota or Ferrari instead of just checking if there's petrol in the tank. And yes, I have to say what comes next because we've become so binary in our thinking. I'm not saying that there isn't a personality dimension. There is. But you can take care of a lot of things first at a structural level. And then what's left, you can address at a personality level. I know a professor of genetics here who works with people with issues that may have a genetics cause, but she doesn't go straight to the genetics. First, she sends you away to take probiotics, do tongue scraping, and take some basic supplements based on a blood test to get all the fundamentals right. And she'll send you away to do that for 3 months even, and then come back. And then what remains, the symptoms that remain, are worth researching based on genetics. So that's the kind of principle that I'm working with here, is that a lot of things that we spend time searching for through therapy and scratching around in the details, the solutions are not to be found there. Those are refinements. The core issue is a mechanistic ego reaction. To go back to the analogy of the car, once you've put petrol in the tank, most cars will be fine, then they're running. And then there might be 1 or 2 that need tuning, and that will be different for a Toyota or a Ferrari. So first we look at the engine as a whole. We recognize that a petrol-driven internal combustion engine goes through the same steps no matter what make it is. It needs fuel and air to go in. There's compression, then ignition, then explosion, then exhaust. That's the mechanism, regardless of the brand. So we're working at the mechanistic level of the ego, addressing things that are common to all of us, and that can be managed effectively at that level without going into the details. The details are extra. The details are fine-tuning. And that then leads us to the word phenomenon. And what that points to is an object or thing that can be observed directly as a whole, as it is, without breaking it down into its components or evaluating its causes. A good way to do this is to imagine you seeing something for the first time, before you've had time to give it a name or figure out its parts or how it works. An example might be if you gave a barstool to a forest tribesman 1,000 years ago, they might have used it as a drum because they had no bars and therefore no concept of barstools. A bit like giving a tea bag to a modern American, you might say. When you haven't applied language to a thing to explain it, it remains a phenomenon. Another very visible and contemporary example is a UFO, or as they call them now, UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. That's all you can say about it for now. We don't know what it is, so it remains a phenomenon. Now, we've become so educated and clever and informed that we no longer look at things phenomenologically. We have language to describe everything. You can Google any subject on earth and then you'll find it has a whole body of knowledge attached to it. Millions, billions of words explaining everything. So we can't see the thing anymore. We can only hear the torrent of language we have about the thing. Now, why is that a problem? In answer to this question, I'm always reminded of the quote by Saul Bellow, my favorite author and Nobel Prize-winning author, in one of his novels, Mr. Samler's Planet, perhaps the greatest opening passage of literature in the annals of literature. And I'll read it for you here. I know it pretty much off by heart, but I'll check it along the way just in case. Shortly after dawn, or what would have been dawn in a normal sky, Mr. Arthur Samler took in the books and papers of his west side bedroom and suspected strongly that they were the wrong books, the wrong papers. In a way, it did not matter much to a man of 70 plus and at leisure. You had to be a crank to insist on being right. Being right was largely a matter of explanations. Intellectual man had become an explaining creature. Fathers to children, wives to husbands, lecturers to listeners, experts to laymen, colleagues to colleagues, doctors to patients, man to his own soul explained, the roots of this, the causes of the other, the sources of events, the history, the structure, the reasons why. For the most part, in one ear, out the other. The soul wanted what it wanted. It had its own natural knowledge. It sat unhappily on superstructures of explanation, poor bird, not knowing which way to fly. I don't know if you agree with me, but I believe he has totally nailed the modern dilemma, even though that was written back in I think that was in the 1960s or 70s that he wrote that. Look around you. We have so much information. We can explain just about everything, yet we can't agree what it means. We're still guilty of the very thing he points to, which we talked about in episode 1, the pilot episode, our need to be right. Are we even close to dealing with that? Not nearly, in my view. It's like the more information we have, the more stupid we become. We need to return to the phenomenon. We need to look at things without all the language explaining them. And again, why do I say that? Let me show you. Let's go one level down on this. And we'll return to an analogy I've used in the past about riding a bicycle. Does all the information in the world on how to ride a bicycle enable you to ride it? No. You need one thing and one thing only, and that thing can only be gained by doing. We've talked about it before. Balance. Balance comes without any knowledge of bicycles. A child can gain balance without having it explained to them. They gain it by conforming, through a process of trial and error, to the one single thing that bicycle riding requires, what bicycles demand for riding to happen. There you have the phenomenon bicycle, and when you meet that phenomenon with the phenomenon balance, you get the phenomenon bicycle riding. You don't need a riding coach. You just need to leave a bicycle lying around where children occur, and riding will happen. Now, that's not to say we can't develop our thinking and knowledge and skills and rules about bicycle riding. Again, we've become so binary in our thinking that I have to say that. In fact, let's talk about that, about our thinking. But let's not go down the knowledge rabbit hole, all the theories of psychology and neuroscience. Let's look at it as a phenomenon, as a child or an alien arriving for the first time and seeing thinking happening. And we're not talking about what we can observe in others, which is behavioral or linguistic expressions of their thinking. We're talking about our own thinking. So imagine you're a child who wakes up to the phenomenon of thinking for the first time, or even better, an alien who gets inserted into a human body and notices thinking as a phenomenon. What would you notice? Well, if you discovered a bicycle, what would be its most striking feature, one that would point to its nature, its purpose? You'd notice that it could move endlessly back and forth because of its round wheels. That's what would prompt you to get onto it and start riding. Then you'd acquire the thing you need to manage that bicycle, which is balance. So if you were that child or that alien noticing thinking for the first time, what would you notice about thinking that is most striking? You'd notice that just like the bicycle, it has no beginning and no end. It can go on forever, and it does. There's no point at which thinking starts or stops. It just happens. That's the phenomenon of thinking, the end. Nothing more to think about or analyze, just to notice, to see. There's that word which we'll come to. And to see that thinking is automatic. There's that word again. And thinking doesn't need your help to do that, to happen. It has its own momentum. Now, what do you need to ride that wave of thinking that is the equivalent of balance for a bicycle, if you're going to be in charge of the thinking? Because once you have balance for a bicycle, you can then steer the bicycle in different directions, and you can reach for the brakes so you can stop it. You can start to manage the bicycle. What do you need to ride that wave of thinking that is the equivalent of balance for a bicycle? Now, it should really make you go away for an hour and do the inquiry yourself. If we were in a workshop together, I would do that. So if you really want to play along, pause here and go away and see what comes up for you when you address that question. Question being, what do you need to ride that wave of thinking that is the equivalent of balance for a bicycle, so that you can manage thinking the way balance would enable you to manage a bicycle? And when you've done that, then come back. Okay? So whether you've done the inquiry on your own and returned or are still here, let's keep going. What we need to ride the wave of thinking that is the equivalent of balance for a bicycle is awareness. Once you have balance on a bicycle, you can steer it in different directions, you can reach for the brakes. So once you have balance, you can manage the bicycle. Once you have awareness, you can do the same for thinking. You can redirect your thinking. Notice I didn't say you can start thinking. You can't. It starts itself. It's automatic. I also didn't say you can stop thinking. You can stop a particular thought, and you can, with awareness, insert another thought and start a new train of thought, but you can't start and stop thinking by itself as a phenomenon. Your mind has a mind of its own. You can only become aware of thinking, aware of your mind, and redirect that thinking, and only for a limited amount of time before you get exhausted and your mind takes over and starts up with something new. Thoughts of doubt, anxiety, and whatever else flood in. Again, why is this useful? Because you can read all the psychology and neuroscience you like, but if you never address this one thing, never correctly perceive and address the phenomenon of thinking, it's like having a bicycle in your yard that you've read all the books about, that you can explain ad nauseum to whomever will listen, but you can't ride the damn thing. This is why academics can be hopeless speakers and presenters and lecturers, deadly boring, because they don't have awareness of their thinking, so they can't steer and direct their immense knowledge. They can't filter the details. They get lost in the information without awareness. It happens in my field too, the field of coaching. People whose knowledge of coaching is developed from an intellectual standpoint instead of from a practical phenomenological one, they tend to get lost along with their clients, and they find that their sessions are exhausting and their processes go nowhere fast. They go around in circles because they're lost inside the phenomenon with no ability to manage it, like a drunk trying to find their way out of a dumpster. The phenomenon of thinking that you have to address is this: that thinking happens by itself. It starts up and cannot be stopped. You can look away from thinking, as in become distracted from it, and most of us are for our entire lives, like the example of the academic I just gave, but you don't start it and you can't stop it as a phenomenon. The object of meditation, by the way, is not to stop thinking, but to become aware of and manage your attention, what you focus on. And for that, you need awareness of thinking. So awareness is to thinking what balance is to a bicycle. And awareness is not knowledge. Knowledge can help. It can give you more details to be aware of, but just as balance doesn't require coaching, awareness itself doesn't require knowledge. You can work with what you can observe directly, phenomenologically, and you can get as far as those Eastern sages did, whose words have such a powerful impact on us. And they're a good example in this instance, because those sages did not have knowledge in terms of the knowledge we have today, but when you hear their words, your mind goes quiet. And why? Because they had awareness of thinking as a phenomenon. For example, Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching says, "One who knows others is intelligent. One who knows himself is enlightened." When you hear this, your mind pauses. There's a gap because you're looking at the phenomenon of knowledge and the direction of knowledge, outward or inward, and what that means. And you could draw your own conclusions from that. You don't need a study to verify what you're seeing. Notice I said looking and seeing there. We'll come to those. And what you're seeing is that attention can be directed outward or inward, and each has a different outcome. There's a whole world in that. And if you stay with it, what results is a measure of awareness, of self-observation. What am I doing right now? You deal with a mechanism of attention at a phenomenological level. That gives you power over your attention, which gives you power over your thought, which gives you power over your decisions, your actions, your outcomes. Now, the academic mind wouldn't do that. It would go automatically down a different path. It would fill that space with thinking. It would want to know, what are the studies on self-reflection and what outcomes are proven? So now what's happening at a structural, mechanistic level? The mind itself doesn't change. It does what it always does, which is to lose presence, lose awareness of itself, and churn information. It might read a dozen papers and draw a conclusion. In my experience, if you read enough academic papers on a single subject, you can come to almost no conclusion, a few marginal, unconvincing conclusions at best, let's say. But guess what? And even if there are strong conclusions to be drawn, guess what? You're still sitting in your chair, unaware of how automatic your mechanistic reactions are. You're unlikely to translate that information into behavior. It will sit inside your head as knowledge. You know more about the bicycle, but you know better at riding it. And once again, binary brains. I'm not discounting academia. I'm saying we've become too dominated by it. We have too much knowledge, but we don't know what to do with it because we don't know how to return to the level of phenomenon. Knowing everything there is to know about the bicycle doesn't gain you any greater balance or strength, fitness or skill. And how many collective years in therapy have we spent drilling down into the details, and what has that done for us in terms of self-managing at a social level, or even at a personal level? There's a time and a place for that, sure, but we've neglected the other piece, the awareness piece. We've forgotten how to ride the bicycle. So to return to the point of all this, I'm introducing you to the terms automatic, mechanistic, phenomenon, and seeing. And what we're doing here in What to Believe is we're looking at automatic thinking and mechanistic ego constructs that arise out of thinking as a phenomenon. And by looking, we see, so we're using seeing as a practice and not thinking, because seeing leads to insight. Aha, I see that. Whereas thinking leads to knowledge. Ah, I know that. And wisdom through seeing gives you power. When you see something, a naked parent, a dead body, your own thinking, you can't unsee it. Your mind experiences it as fact, and facts change reality. You can accumulate knowledge by sitting in a chair or scrolling on a phone, and your reality won't change. And if all we do is that, the world won't change. So we're addressing human beings at the phenomenological level, which means looking at them directly, practically, to see how they work, without being distracted or limited by the theory behind them, without applying endless layers of language and explanation to them. And we're doing that because that's the level of reality. That's where things occur as things, where we can experience them and can work with them. That's where bicycle riding happens, and we want to ride the bicycle, not explain it or theorize about it. We want to return to that level as human beings so that we can apply all our immense knowledge with wisdom, which we've lost. And just to note, on the journey that I took in some of the episodes so far, I've shared that I had an insight around age 17 about the criteria for the body of truth that I would be looking for. And it was very much around this. It was around the fact that any person at any point in history, at any level of education, should be able to access truth through direct observation of themselves and their environment without relying on knowledge, without having to need that study that was done in 1960 or the neuroscience research that was done in 2000. And that enables us to have, to achieve some level of enlightenment. No, it had to have been available at all times. And when I found these methods that I'm working with, because I'm not making this stuff up, it's based on strong foundations of linguistic ontology. There's Vipassana meditation and various others. I'll get into those and I'll explain them as we go through this. But I found this method and this approach in these traditions, and that's what I'm sharing with you here. So to sum up, so far, at the level we've been working, we've discovered the following. We've discovered that seeing is different from thinking. We've discovered that seeing keeps you steady at the level of reality, whereas unmanaged thinking has you going around in circles in your head. We've seen that seeing leads to insight, which results in wisdom, whereas unmanaged thinking leads to more thinking, which leads to analysis paralysis, which is hidden behind the facade of knowledge. So the ego is pleased with its knowledge, but it's not necessarily getting anywhere. And wisdom means knowing what to do with a thing, whereas analysis goes around in circles. And this is literal. I mean, there's science around this. It's been proven. Look up the case of Elliot by Dr. Antonio Damasio and see what the impact is of pure thinking on a person's ability to make decisions. Also, if you look up elements around rumination and thinking in cognitive behavior therapy to do with anxiety and worry, you'll see the same principles are relevant there and are used for effective therapy. So that's why we're doing what we're doing, because we want to see through the illusion of thinking and mechanistic ego reactions and work at the level of what's real and what matters, what really makes a difference. In the next episode, we'll explore the fact that you're not in charge of thinking, and we'll explore that as a phenomenon. And we'll see undoubtedly that you come after the fact of thinking. And we'll go into what that means and why it matters. It sounds a bit scary, but it's ultimately liberating. That's What to Believe for this week. If you're finding value from this, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. If something landed, not just made sense, but actually landed, then share it with someone who you believe could benefit from it as well. That's how this work spreads. You'll find a written companion on Substack under my name. You can support me through Substack, and you can also find links in the show notes to work with me. I'm Neil Bierbaum. Thank you for listening. See you next time.
We'll be right back.